Thanks very much. Thanks, Ross. And good morning again, and I hope you don't get sick of my voice. It is, again, a delight to be here. I'm quite nervous. Ross told me that you're going to be an interactive audience and that you'd be firing difficult questions at me and throughout my talk, and that hasn't happened yet. So I'm a little bit worried that I'm not covering what you want to hear. I would be delighted for some confrontation, interaction, whatever you call it. I'm quite used to it. I'm quite thick-skinned, so please don't hold back. If you want to chip in and comment, ask questions as I go through, we have got plenty of time. I'm really proud to be part of the UK pig industry because we have shown this reduction in antibiotic use over the last couple of years. And really proud that it's been an industry-wide initiative. I don't think there's any single person that can take credit for it. It has been a really collaborative achievement for the UK, and very proud of it. I want to talk now about what we've been doing in the UK and what's worked and what hasn't worked. And I can give you my view, but I know that we have very different systems in the UK to the ones that you have here. There'll be different opportunities and challenges that you face. And so if you want to ask me a question about something that you're facing particularly, please don't hesitate to shout out. I can see you. The light is quite bright, but I can see you. Or just stand up if I'm not responding to an arm in the air. When we started on this journey, we had a number of opportunities that we needed to capitalise on. One was that the veterinary surgeons in the UK were the gatekeepers of antibiotic use. That's not true worldwide. We know that antibiotics are freely available in a number of countries over the counter without veterinary prescription. We don't have a huge amount of illegal drugs. The internet has made it possible to get drugs more widely, and we know that there will be some illegal use of antibiotics, but it is quite minimal. And we're quite lucky, and I think Australia would be similar, that you don't allow a lot in that you don't know about. So the veterinary surgeons are the gatekeepers, and what the vet says generally takes quite a lot of beating. Producers tend to listen to their vets. Our vets work really hard with their producers. They are in partnership with them, and that's been a real strength and an opportunity for us. In the pig sector, we separate profit from antibiotic or from medicine sales from the vets. The vets get very, very little profit. They do sell antibiotics, but a lot of it will go through the feed mills. They'll write a prescription. The vets now really don't care. The pig vets don't care whether they get money for prescribing antibiotics or not, because they don't charge it. And I think that's been a big factor in allowing the vets to sell their veterinary advice. And it was quite interesting, when I first graduated back in the early 90s, I went into cattle practice. And it was very similar, actually, pigs and cattle. We were being told that we needed to start to dissociate our expertise from our antibiotic or medicine sales. And then going off into the pig industry for 25 odd years, we did that. We dissociated our sales from advice, and pig vets don't get money for selling drugs. And I went to a mastitis meeting for cattle about 2 years ago, and it was my first reintroduction into the cattle sector again. And there were vets in the room who said, well, why would I want to reduce antibiotics when I get all my income from antibiotics? And I think my jaw must have hit the floor, because I couldn't believe that the pig sector in the UK had moved on so much. And some of the cattle sector, and it's not across the board, but some of the cattle sector are still those laggards, and it's been a very protracted timescale that they're getting on board with selling their veterinary advice rather than selling drugs. So I think that was a huge opportunity for us in the pig sector. And we've been doing a lot of work on behavioural change in veterinary surgeons, a lot of research about how we can drive change, and this is an area that we're looking at in quite a lot of detail within AHDB, and how we can drive that change, and what is it that's going to motivate vets and producers to change their approach to doing things. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. And the other opportunity that we knew, particularly from AHDB, was that farmers learn best from farmers. They do absolutely take their veterinary advice. They pay a lot of money for it, so they want it to be good. And they do listen to their vets, but they actually learn better from other farmers. And we find that discussion groups and getting farmers in a room together to learn from each other is the best way of driving change between producers. As Einstein said, if you always do what you always did, you will always get what you always got. And I think that is very true. And we used that within the UK pig sector to try and drive the change. So by targeting a relatively small population of vets to drive change and get them to see issues from a different perspective, we could then escalate that down and build it out to producers, down to the supply chain and to the wider public. So we had a much greater pull if we could use that change. Now there is feedback from the public going into producers, supply chain going back into producers and into vets. So it's reiterating all these messages coming down and back up to the top, and it's a real circle of messaging that I think has the power to drive change. We've all heard the term practice makes you perfect. Well, I don't believe that's true. I think practice makes you consistent. And if you're always practicing to get a number 1 on a dartboard, you'll always get a number 1, and you'll always be short of getting the 20s. So if you practice something really bad, you'll be good at doing it really bad. And I think trying to get people to see this and to reflect on their practice and see what they're doing and drive change is really key to getting the message across. You may have seen this kind of behavioural change cycle, where here, this is pre-contemplation, where you're not considering doing any change at all. And these will be the people with the fingers in their ears. And then there'll be a group of people who are contemplating making a change, but they're not actually doing anything about it. I do this every morning when I get up and I get on the scales and I think I must lose weight, but I don't do anything about it because I haven't got there yet. But I know I should do. It's very easy to get into this stage. We know we should be doing something, but actually just getting off our backsides and doing something about it. Undecided, really. And then there's the preparation, where an individual will show that they have an intent to change. And with motivational interviewing, which is a technique that we use quite a lot with our farmers and producers, if they say, I know I should do that, or I know I should do that, we know they're not going to do it. But actually, if in your discussions with them they say, I really want to do this, they're much, much more likely to actually go ahead and make that change. So how you get your producers to say, yep, I really want to make a change with antibiotics, I'm on board and I want to do this, that word want is key. So listen out for that when you're having your interactions. If people are saying, yeah, I should do it, I know I should do it, you're probably flogging a dead horse, you're not going to get there. They're probably still in this pre-contemplation. So getting them into this preparation, yeah, I want to do it, I'm really motivated. And then the action, the individual's motivated and works with others and they start to affect change. And then you get this cycle of change. And you might get lapses, but actually reflecting on what you've done and going around in a circle will produce your lasting change. So it's not an easy process. It is quite difficult and you have to be in the right frame of mind. And they use motivational interviewing in a lot of addiction, a lot of rehabilitation of prisoners. And they've shown really consistently that where the prisoners or the addicts say, I really want to do this, it makes such a difference. And it's that mindset. So looking out for that change in mindset. And if somebody is in that mindset, you know you've got to act and help them. Because that's the key point to get in there. You can, Ross. How did we get the idea of coaching?
No. Did you apply it? Did you try it? Did you go down that track in the same way as the Dutch
Yeah, we do. We within AHDB, there are a number of different models that we use. The one that's kind of in favour at the moment is what we call a CASI technique, CASI, and that's a circle of change. And when you're looking at a behaviour that you want to affect in your target population, you start with it. So rather than saying antibiotics, we need to reduce antibiotics because it's the right thing to do, you start with saying, well, actually, how are we going to do that? The first thing we need to do is we need our producers to start recording what they're using, because until we've got that, we don't know. So you actually start with that objective, and then you work out how you're going to do that. So you've got to put in the systems to allow them to record. You've got to give them feedback. They've got to be able to measure it, and it's got to be simple. And if you can put that in place, you kind of work backwards from the outcome that you want, and you start that way, rather than saying, you've got to do that because it's good for you. Because if somebody comes to me and says, Mandy, you've got to lose weight because it's not healthy being overweight, okay, bog off, I don't want to know. I don't like being told what to do. And I'm sure a lot of people out here don't like being told what to do. So actually it's got to come from within. And if it comes from within and you want to do it yourself, you're much more likely to succeed.
And have you trained your veterinarians to go down that track?
Yeah. The UK veterinarian population, I don't think some of them would mind me saying this, we've got a real gap in the middle-aged people. So most of our vets are either below 30 or over 50. So if we look at the over 50s, because they're the ones that have really got all the power, they have been quite well practiced at doing things quite badly, some of them. And so to try and get them to change has been quite difficult. And in a different matter, I had 6 of the most. We've only got about 30 practicing vets in pigs in the UK. It's a very consolidated industry. And I had 6 of the old guys, I call them the old guys, in. And they said to me, Mandy, what on earth do you think you can teach us about pig practice? And this was for a completely different project. But I needed them to change their behaviour because they were becoming trainers for me. And they thought they knew everything about training people. And they didn't. They were very, very good pig vets, but they didn't know much about training. And we took them into a session. And at the end of it, one of them, who is now retired, and Mark White was in this audience as well, in the audience, saying, what do you think you could teach me? They all said at the end of it, if only I'd known that when I first graduated, I might have been a good vet. And actually, for me, that was a really good kind of feeling, because they saw that actually they can change what they do, they can change the way that they behave, and they can reflect on it and modify it to become better. And I think that was really, really good. So I think you can teach old dogs new tricks through the right methods. And I think it's the same for the producers as well. But giving them the structure and the support to do it, I think, is really important, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I don't know if that's answered your question. But so we've gone from this kind of image of us feeding antibiotics freely to our pigs to having some really good news stories in the UK. And this in itself is quite motivating. So I think when people see this and they see that we're doing good work, we've reduced antibiotic usage again, and rather than being reactive in our communications, particularly through RUMA, which is our Alliance for Responsible Use in Medicines, they've got a really good PR guy, a lady, who goes out proactively reporting, whereas 2-3 years ago, we were only responding to media reactively. But now we put out good news stories, and it seems to be really working and hitting home, and we get quite a lot of media coverage now, and we've gone from being the bad guys in the pig industry to being those that are using antibiotics responsibly. So what's worked well so far? Well, the electronic medicines book, which is the national collation of medicines use, has worked really, really well in the pigs, and I think this isn't true for the other sectors. The ruminant sectors are now starting to look at it. They don't have such a consolidated industry as we do in the pig sector, so it's a lot harder. And what they've been doing in the cattle is you've got various organisations that have set up their own ways of recording antibiotics, and they don't match up. We can't join them all together. So we've got a much bigger job, particularly on the dairy side, to try and collate data for a national recording figure. And I think because they've been slow to the party, they've gone off, they've fragmented, and that's going to be a lot harder to pull together. The sheep sector, everybody said, well, you'll never get the sheep guys to do anything. And we do use antibiotics in sheep. I know that here it's quite extensive and you're not high users. We have a lot of lowland flocks, a lot of small-scale hobby farmers that maybe only have 20 or 30 ewes. And they do use a lot of antibiotics. They'll go to the vet at the start of lambing time and they'll say, I'll have 12 bottles of Penstrep because I give every lamb a shot of Penstrep when it comes out. And they'll treat every ewe with a shot of antibiotics just in case. And you've got some of the more senior vet partners who will say, yep, that's fine, you can have 12 bottles, come back when you've run out. And completely irresponsible. So they're not overall high users, but they do use antibiotics. And those sheep farmers, we were told, don't have computers. They're absolutely, you'll not get them on board. But actually the last 6 months, we've seen one vet, one sheep producer do exactly what they did in the pig sector, and then now getting to the top of that innovation curve, that normal distribution curve that I showed you, and we're getting on board with the sheep. And I think the sheep sector is going to overtake the dairy and the beef sector, and that was against what everybody thought because they were so disparate in the nature of their industry. So the EMB worked, and I think it worked well because we had one system, one method of recording right from the outset, and it was easy. It wasn't a complicated system. And we've now got over 90% of our slaughtered pigs are represented. It was voluntary. It's now semi-voluntary, as I said earlier this morning, but it has been a real partnership. So the vets have been our real champions. They've been really beating the drum, saying, come on guys, we've got to get on board with this. We've got to record. If you want to be in pigs in 10 years' time, you're going to have to record. And that's been listened to, but it's also been coming from the bottom up as well. We had a really vociferous group of producers saying, yep, we need to. And actually what we've shown is that where the vet doesn't want to record, the producers don't record. So the vet is absolutely key in getting those producers on board. We've had good leadership. We talked about Mark, and I hear there's another Mark White in the audience here, but I don't mean Mark in the audience here, I mean Mark in the UK, and one producer. And the consolidated nature of our industry has really assisted that. Dame Sally Davis is our outgoing Chief Medical Officer, so same as we have a Chief Veterinary Officer, we have a Chief Medical Officer, and she's really championed the global drive on antibiotic resistance and reducing it. And she would stand up and in the press, back in 2016, she'd stand there and say, you know, you pig people, you're responsible, you're creating all this antimicrobial resistance because you overuse antibiotics in the pig sector. So actually, once we'd got the first few years of data under our belt, we got Dame Sally Davis. I wrote to her and I said, come and see what we're doing. And I positioned a meeting right next to her office in London so that she could just pop in and see it. So there was a bit of method in my madness. Pig producers and pig vets were saying, well, I've got to go to London. We don't want to go to London. But she came in, and from that day, she has promoted what we've been doing in the pig sector. We took her out onto a pig farm. We showed her. And it was mind-blowing. The pennies were just dropping as she realised that actually you've got lots and lots of naive animals here. You need antibiotics, but you are actually caring for them. And we showed it, and she's turned into one of our great supporters and really promoted what we've been doing, which has been great. I'm going to just take a little bit of time to show you the EMB, and this is a screenshot. And I apologise because it's captured over quite a long period of time, because I wasn't quite sure how long I was going to do this for, but I will show you this, so it should be on auto, and I'll try and talk through it. So when you log on to the AHDB website, onto the Pig Hub here, this is the screen you see. And there are sections for producers, corporates, your marketing groups, vets, and so on. Here is a helpline number, and we do have a bureau of staff that are available during working hours to help pig producers if they need any help setting up the system or entering their data. And they've got very good at this. They're brilliant. They're much better than me. So if you click onto your producer section, you can see you've got all your account, your holdings, if you've got a number of different holdings down here. The EAML2 is the pig movement, so every pig has to have a license to move in the UK, has to be pre-authorised before the pigs move, and they do that on our site here. And then these are the additional services, and I'm going to talk about some of these tomorrow. So we've got the Pig Health Scheme, the Pig Pro, which is our CPD for pig farmers. They can look at their health scheme reports. They can see how many of their staff have signed up for training courses. We've got a significant diseases charter, and I'll talk about that tomorrow, and various other tools that we have. So go into the e-medicines book, and each producer is given a username and password, and they log on. The red tractor deadline will be there. It'll be really clear for them to see. That's the welcome bit. It talks about what's going to happen to your data, and you click on and you can see all your holdings. And you can choose a pig holding, and it's a traffic light system telling you that you're overdue or that you're just about ready to submit, or you haven't got anything to do if you're green. So if you click onto a holding, it's always difficult to do this because you never know how long you're going to talk for. Click in. And it gives you a dashboard, and immediately you can see your benchmarking. And so this shows you a high user. This is what a high user would see. So this is the average use for your sector, and this is your usage. And you can see straight away, actually, am I doing something wrong? And it's making producers just think. And then you can see antibiotic recording. So you've got your antibiotics and you've got your critically important antibiotics. These are the EMA ones, not the WHO critically important antibiotics. So very quickly you can see what your trends are, and this is done on a quarterly basis here. You can change it to be an annual recording, so you can monitor what you've done. Oh, Q1 2019, I've suddenly used a lot of antibiotics. I wonder if that's a mistake, or is that correct? And so you can see this before you enter your data and before you submit it. So if you've made a mistake, it'll flag up. And actually we've put a box on now that does flag up and say, it appears that you're slightly higher than last time. Do you want to double check this, or are you happy to submit it? And it still allows you to submit it. You can select a different holding, and again, this one will show you that your usage is medium level, shows your antibiotic usage, your trends, and you can see your antibiotic usage is considered to be high. And so it's really alerting producers. It's not saying, you're doing anything wrong. It's just telling you that you are in the highest 25% or you're in the lowest 25%. And it gives you an option for calling us for help. So if you want help, if you don't quite know why you're high, you want to check that your figures that you're putting in are correct, give us a shout. This is the Pig Hub.
And the Pig Hub is where the advice comes from?
No, so let me just stop that there. So the Pig Hub is the software, the hub of databases that we have. So a producer will have a login to the Pig Hub. If they click on there, they'll get through to one of our bureau staff who'll ask, what's your problem? What kind of thing do you want to do? And they might say, well, I don't understand why I'm so high, or I need help with certain things, or whatever. We do not give veterinary advice. Absolutely no way veterinary advice. But they might use us as an intermediary to say, I'm really concerned that I'm a high user, but my vet doesn't know or hasn't looked. What can I do? We would do things like we would offer to print out the reports and send them to them. Give them guidance on what types of antibiotics, show them how they can break down their usage a bit more easily for their vet. And I also have an open phone policy. If any vet wants to phone me up, they've all got my number, they can phone me up, and, you know, quite often it's, you know, not with good things, but sometimes they'll phone up and say, you know, what can we do here? How can we look at this? So it's just a support, because there's no point putting a system up here if a producer feels that they've got nowhere to turn, they don't know where to turn, and sometimes it's not always easy to go to their vet. So it's really done for that reason. Okay. So then this is to show a low user, and again it comes up with you're in the bottom 25%. So green. And notice here that this says provisional. So the benchmarking, we had a bit of debate about this, because what's the point of putting benchmarking up, you know, a quarter of a year later? People wanted it real time. But actually, we know that the people that put their data on later on in the quarter are the higher users. So if you put your data on early, and we only let it go live when we've got 100 producers entered their data, it goes up, and so you can print it off, and you'll see that you're quite a low user or quite a high user, and then it'll change by the end of the quarter. So we put provisional there, and then when it's finalised, if you're doing it early in the quarter, we recommend that you go back later on to have a look at it.
Were you able to put this up ready-made, or did it take months while you were perfecting the system, or did you put it up in bits and add an enhancement and things like that?
It's an ongoing process. So we've done this really in response to the industry. So to start with, it was just basically put your data in, and we generated an anonymised aggregated figure. And the benchmarking went live probably, certainly in my time at AHDB. So we spent a lot of time working out, and there are still glitches with it. You know, it's not perfect, but we put this up probably a year ago, maybe not even a year. And actually that has been the biggest, I think that's had the biggest impact on use, just allowing producers to see where they sit relative to their peers.
And how many IT people would you have?
We have, the software's all developed by a company, so we outsource the database to a company. And then in my team, I have one person who oversees a lot of the databases, and one more junior person. So we're not a big team. It's quite a crude method. It's not sophisticated. And when we want changes, there are certain things that we can do quite easily, and certain things where it takes a little bit of time because we just don't have the resource. And those people are also checking all the data that's coming in. So it's not like they're just doing the database. They've got day jobs to do as well. So it can be quite slow, and it can be quite frustrating, but I think the benchmarkings work really well. But it will be refined. I'm sure it'll be changed over the next year, but we'll do that in consultation with the industry. What do they want? So, for example, I don't know if you can see it, but sometimes here, you can be quite a low user, but because the data is skewed to the left, the average is here, but your median, and I'll come on in a minute to show you, the median's here. So you can actually be in this first bar and be a high user, and they don't like that. But actually, you know, we know that. But there's not an awful lot that we can do. Is that running? Don't think that's running. Okay. Yeah, so we do, and at the top here it says, you know, this is new software, please leave us feedback. So we're continually asking for feedback, because it's not our system, it's for producers. If it doesn't work for them, they're not going to use it. So we're really keen that they feed back, and every time I go to a meeting, I say, please just pick up the phone, tell me what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and we'll see if we can change. I can't make any promises, because we don't have unlimited budget. So I think cost-wise, we spend, not including staff costs, less than £10,000 a year for this. So it's not big bucks. And then we do trends, and you can see the sector trend, and then you can see your farm usage. And the other thing that we've done is we've split farm type out so that if you're a finisher only, you're not comparing yourselves with a breeder weaner, and I'll show you some figures for that so that it makes it a lot more representative of your use on your farm. Gives a little bit of information about critically important antibiotics, and you can change the report from quarter to year or vice versa. So it's a little bit, and we're working on making this a little bit more sophisticated. And you can also group your holdings. So if you want to look at particular holdings or particular supply chains, so if you've got a breeder weaner that supplies into a finisher or into a grower that goes into a finisher, you can actually group that. So you can look at the whole chain, or you can look at all your nursery units or all your finisher units. You can group them together as you want. And for vets, we allow the vet to, the vet's made an agent by the producer, and they will, they can say, well, what are my farms doing? And within practices where you've got vets within different practices, you can compare and contrast your usage on your farms.
So a group like Andy Morris, for example, with his various herds scattered throughout Queensland, he can compare those dozen or so farms and see how they're all going on this system.
Yeah, so you just select the herds that you want to group together. As long as they're yours, you can't compare somebody else's. But as long as you've got the authority to do that, they're your herds, you own them, you can group them in any way you want to. So whether it's within a pyramid or a supply chain or a particular type of, if you want to look at how all your breeding sows are doing. How's that going? And so this will give you the sector averages and your production type averages as well. So here you can see this is a breeder weaner, so it will only compare like units. So you have to enter, when you go in to set up your system, you have to say what type of unit you are. And you can change it to total quantity of antibiotic in the active ingredient. And then it'll give you a breakdown by antibiotic class as well, if you want. So, a little bit of information on critically important antibiotics, and also more detail if you want it. And that's the vet test, so the vet can also look at it. Here you can see again that this is provisional. That will change to final at the end of the quarter when we don't accept any more submissions for that.
Are you able to analyse the data for the individual practices? If there are 30 practices, for example, are they benchmarked against each other at any stage?
Individual vets, if they're an agent for a producer, then they can group their own units. And then it's up to the vets. If they want to share that with other vets, they do. And we know that a lot of them do, actually. There's not a lot of secrecy about it, and they will be quite open. I have to say there are some vets who, I stood up at a meeting the other day, and one of the vets said, well, it's a load of rubbish, your EMB system, because, what use is it to me? You need to put benchmarking on there. I said, well, it's been there for over a year. But they're just not, some of them just not engaging with it. So there are those people who don't engage. I know that there are some that don't look at it. We can look to see who's logged on, but I don't waste time doing that. So why has the EMB been successful? I think we've known what we've been doing, and I think if I asked everybody in this room if they could count to 100, you'd probably all say yes, and some of you might well have seen this before, but can you all count to 100? Okay, so can you start counting to 100? Okay, now stop. How many's got to 10? How many could see 10? Anybody see more than 10? 20? No. So it's quite difficult, although we know you can all count to 100, but actually by just giving you a little bit of a helping hand and framing what you're seeing, how many of you can count to 100 quite quickly now? So you can see that just by adding that scaffolding, that framework, allows you to measure much more quickly. And I think that's what the EMB's done, is that people have known what they're using and they're doing it well, but actually when it comes down to it, proving that they can do it, they couldn't do it. And so the EMB has done that for them. And I think that was one of the big successes. So the new features on the EMB, we're putting up validation messages. So when a producer enters in that they've sold 10,000 pigs and they've only sold 2,000, it'll come up and say, hang on a second, are you sure this is correct? Still allows you to submit it. Or if it comes up and it says it appears that you've used a lot more antibiotics this quarter, are you sure this is correct? Yep, you can click on it. They'll also see that graph before they submit it, so they can see their trends. So if they can see a spike, it's much more visual. So they're not just getting a pop-up box, they're getting a graph, and it'll show, actually, for the last year, you've been at this level, and then all of a sudden you've got a spike or the other way down. Are you sure that's correct? Are you sure you haven't missed something off? The benchmarking is moving up onto the dashboard, so as soon as the producer logs on, that benchmarking's there. Holdings and groups, we've talked about coming online. And one of the things that we have a lot of batch systems, and entering on a quarterly basis doesn't work particularly well. So we're looking at how producers can enter on a monthly basis for their farm analysis, but will still allow us to provide data to the industry on a quarterly basis. So that's an ongoing thing. And the other thing that we've added was, at the request of the industry, was the date that the return was first submitted. So this is to do with the red tractor. So red tractor say you've got to enter your data within 6 weeks. And I think what was happening was vets were going out onto the farm and the producer hadn't entered their data, and they said, well, quickly do it, and you won't get a non-compliance with your red tractor. But red tractor thought that wasn't too good, so that's now a date that the thing's been first submitted. So there is that quality assurance to make sure that people aren't just doing it when the vet goes and doing it retrospectively. I think one of the things that's been important for us as an industry is to have this good feeling about a number of data sets rather than just one and wondering whether it's going up and down. But this shows here quarterly figures to quarter 4 in 2018. So this trend, and I do think that when you've got a data series like this and you get a little blip, it's much easier to explain it and say, well, actually, we've got a blip here. But when we were here, we certainly wouldn't release quarterly data. We were too nervous about it. I don't know whether that was right or wrong. With our critically importance, you can see that in 2015, not a huge amount, but relatively massive, and we've gone right down here. This was mostly colistin. Colistin is now really difficult to get hold of in the UK. We've still got some left on shelves, but it's not readily available, so I suspect that this is going to go down even further. The colistin story is quite interesting. In the UK, the poultry sector are largely 4 main organisations, and one of the heads of one of those organisations has a child with cystic fibrosis, and colistin is used as a last-line defence for cystic fibrosis patients as a nebulizer against Klebsiella, which the cystic fibrosis sufferers often get. We heard yesterday that it's very toxic. You can't give it systemically. It's not particularly pleasant. But for cystic fibrosis patients, it is a lifesaver. And because one of the poultry guys' child had cystic fibrosis, they banned it. They did a voluntary ban of it, and so no poultry in the UK will have colistin now, because the other 3 followed suit. And we've more or less followed suit. We don't really use colistin anymore. I think maybe 1 or 2 practices have got a couple of bottles, but they're rapidly going out of date, and I don't think there'll be any more imported. We can break down according to the different types of antibiotics. This is 2017. If I put up 2016 and 2018, they're almost identical. And I wish I'd done that in response to the question that I had this morning, is are we seeing a change? No, we're not. We don't see a massive change in the types of antibiotics that we're using. It's generally across the board. There will be subtle changes, but it's not major. And so no surprise that tetracyclines are the major player there. What could work better? Well, we saw that the distribution curve of usage is really skewed to the left, but we still talk about the mean. And I think that that's doing a disservice to a lot of our producers. I think we should be talking about the median, but obviously if we're reporting into Europe, we need to talk about the mean because that's what everybody talks about, but it's not terribly representative of the industry. I think this is a much better indicator, but I'm also aware that I'll get hit over the head and just told that I'm manipulating the figures to make them look better, because if I suddenly start putting out the median figure rather than the mean, it's obviously going to be better, it's going to be lower. But I think the median is a better way that we could represent it, and I think representation of the data is something that we need to look at in the future. This graph is showing the rate of submission after the days after the quarter ends. So if we think about quarter one being the 11th of May, how many producers are submitting, and it's cumulative. And you can see that in 2017, we had a bit of a blip here. This is one of the large corporates who all of a sudden over a period of 1 week got all their data on board. But we had about 1,200 submissions, so that would be 1,200 holdings. And then you can see that as we've gone through up to 2018, we've got about 2,300 units that submit data on a quarterly basis. And I don't know what the size of your industry would look like here on the number of holdings, but that's what we've got. So about 2,300 in total, and that represents 90% of our pig industry. One of the big questions that was asked when we first set this up, well, I'm not going to put my data on because I don't know what you're going to do with it and I don't know who's going to have it. And I think people are less sceptical about this now. At AHDB, we've been very careful not to let other people have the data. We get asked, I probably get asked twice a week if a group can have data for this, that, and the other. Quite often it's research groups who want to look at antibiotic usage data. But actually the data is really easy. I just say, no, the data are the producers. If you want producer data, you go to the producers and get it. And that puts a lot of people off. I don't think I'm going to be able to do that indefinitely, but at the moment that's my standpoint. We do allow the VMD, the aggregated anonymised data, and that's really what we do. We are starting to do a little bit of work for the industry, but it is very much driven by the industry. It's not what I'm doing. I think working for AHDB as well, we're also subject to freedom of information requests. So if we do some analysis, another organisation can actually put in a freedom of information, and we are legally obliged to let that data go. So for example, if I were to do an analysis of antibiotic use on indoor and outdoor farms, and I don't publish it, and somebody gets wind of that, they can put in a freedom of information. And actually that might not be data that we as AHDB want to put out there, because we're there for everybody. We're not saying that one system's better than the other. So we've got to be very careful about the data that we analyse. But we don't let it out, and we never have done. And when we do let it out, it will only be at the request of the producers. And we're looking at various systems to put on there where producers can say, yeah, actually I want supermarket A to have my data, or I want research group B to have my data, or I want this organisation to have my data, or whatever, but that's quite complicated. So very clearly the data are the producers. As I say, we have been doing some kind of basic work that I'm not too worried about if this gets into the public domain. So in 2017, quarter one, you can see that we were quite diverse in our total usage, and we've contracted right down, and that again has been shown across the board. If we look by category, so breeder to finisher, breeder to weaner, a finisher, a nursery, and a nursery to finisher. And no surprises really that the nurseries and the nursery finishers, these two here, are the high users. So the breeders are much lower users. So that's why we split that out into the benchmarking, so that you can compare your production type with others in the sector. This is looking at the number of high usage. So we've got sort of 70, 80 high users in that period. It's just incomplete data. So that's what we call people that we're looking at that group. So quite a small population of producers when you think that this is sort of 70, 80 submissions when we've got 2,400. It's quite a low level. But what they're doing is they're pulling that mean really far to the right when it should be closer to the median. So that's why the industry, I think, are getting on board saying we need to do something with these high-end users. We did have a small project looking at high-end users, and this was quite interesting actually. I had a student come and spend a year in our group. She's literally just left this summer, and she was looking at use, and we were offered some diagnostic testing. We can't provide diagnostic testing for individual farms, but our government agency, the APHA, had some money left over, and Susanna Williamson is a close colleague of mine. We work very closely together, and she said, Mandy, when I presented this, she said, we've got some money left in our budget. Wouldn't it be interesting to see if we could offer some diagnostic testing to those high-end users to see if they, to help them? I said, yeah, great idea. So we came up with a cunning plan, and we orchestrated it through the EMB because we can't give money, and we couldn't also share information with APHA, so we did a joint thing. And we wrote to, when producers put in their usage for the quarter, we looked at them, we pulled out all the high users, and these are users that have had higher than their average unit type for 3 out of the last 4 quarters, and they had to have a usage of over 400 mg per kg. We didn't have that many. We wanted 100. We were going to offer this to 100. We couldn't find 100. So we had to reduce it down to 300 mg per kg. So that gives you an indication of that far right group of people who are the real high users, really pulling our mean up. So we offered it, and we used the nudge theory. So when David Cameron was our Prime Minister, he set up his nudge unit out of number 10 Downing Street. And this was the behavioural insights team. So they looked at the nudge theory. I don't know if anybody's read the nudge theory, David Helpburn, looking at how you can nudge behaviour change in various industries. And it's all about social norms. So if you hear a report on the news that says, 70% of people still admit to speeding when they're driving. Most people think, oh, well, okay, well, I'm not too bad because I don't always speed, so 70%, I'm better than most people. But actually, if you were to reword that and say that 70% of the population think that people who speed should be put in prison, you're much more likely to stop speeding. So it's those little nudges, and they are tiny little nudges that can really drive behaviour change. And we were looking at this, and so we decided we were going to, they'd done this on the human side, where Dame Sally Davis had written a letter to high prescribing GPs in the London area. And they wrote exactly the same letter, but they sent it from an anonymous signatory. And they had a significantly higher response rate in reduction of antibiotic by 4% in those that had received the letter from Dame Sally Davis, which is actually quite a phenomenal reduction for the human side. So we wanted to look at this. So Linda, our intern, set up a project, and she had 100 letters, and she used some terminology that she'd picked out from the literature in one letter and didn't use it in the other letter, and we sent them to 100 producers, 50 with one and 50 with the other. And actually the ones where we didn't use the nudge theory, we got a higher response rate. But she had used 3 different things in one and 2 in the other, so it wasn't a brilliant study, but she had designed it herself. But actually what she found really, really blew my mind away was that we had a significantly higher response rate from female producers than we did males. Now, we don't have many female producers in the UK. They're in a minority. But they responded really well. So actually what that tells me is don't write to men if you want them to change. But you know, joking apart, I think that's really interesting. I think that's something that we don't know very much about because we sit in our ivory towers, as it were, trying to create change within the industry, but not understanding what makes men tick is you know, I wish I could. Anyway, so one of the other challenges that we have is retailer pressure. I talked a little bit about retailers imposing bans on certain antibiotics. This is really ramping up, and also we've got retailers going to individual producers saying, you supply me, I want your antibiotic use data. And we know from a couple of cases that where that's happened, if the producer maybe is a batch finisher and they haven't sent any pigs to slaughter, their antibiotic use for that quarter is going to be quite high because they haven't sent their pigs off to slaughter. So what do? They fudge the figures. So then we go through and we say, well, actually, you didn't send any pigs to slaughter that quarter, so you know your antibiotic level will be high, but it will be compensated for the next time. But we know that they're doing it to give retailers what they want to hear. So we're very keen to work with the retailers. They're not an easy bunch to work with, and I apologise if there are any retailers in the audience, but in the UK they're very diverse. Some of them are really responsible, others are totally irresponsible. They all say that they're going to keep it non-competitive and they're not going to publish antibiotic usage data, but these are some of our main retailers, and they're all publishing their antibiotic use data. But actually where they get it from, we don't know. Asda, one of the value chain supermarkets, but one of the big top four, they don't record on pigs at all. So how they've got this data, we just don't know. We've got no idea. It's just fictitious, really. And I think that's quite dangerous because it sends a mixed message to consumers and they don't know how to respond or what to do with it. But they say they're going to keep it non-competitive, so we are working with them. And we're working with them trying to draft a code of conduct which will determine how they use their data, what data they will get, and also to try and stop them from banning certain antibiotics because a producer sending pigs into a particular processing plant, part of that pig might go to Asda or Tesco or one of the other retailers, another bit go to the other. And if individual retailers ban individual antibiotics soon, that producer's not going to have any antibiotics that they can use on that farm, and that's not good for animal welfare. So we're working hard with them. There is no more silver bullet with antibiotics, and I don't think there will be any silver bullet. The opportunities and challenges for the future, we need to show that we've got continued responsible use, and what does that look like? A number of disease control programs on farm, and we're seeing that the vets and the producers are stepping up to this. Targeted antibiotic use, and I think this is the biggest change that's happened on the UK farms, is that people have gone from in-feed meds to pulse treating in the water. A little bit concerned by some of the water story that we heard yesterday and about the cleanliness of it and particulate matter, because that is a big issue in water with medication. Better vaccines and diagnostics, and we're also seeing we've got a couple of companies that are developing autogenous vaccines, and they seem to be working really well. In the fish sector, interestingly, have basically got rid of all their bacterial diseases through the use of autogenous vaccines. So I think big opportunities there. There's next reductions that we're going to make are going to be harder. We're going to have to make sure we don't compromise animal welfare. We are getting disease breakdowns. We've had real problems with swine dysentery in the last 6 months. I'm not sure that that's not because we've reduced antibiotics. Has that just been grumbling along undetected, and now we've reduced antibiotics that it's coming to the surface? There might be legislation, and there will be increasing demands on data. People want the data. And just to finish up, talking about changing perceptions, how many people in the room would suggest that the square that A is in is darker than the square B is in? Nobody? Hands up if you do. Hands up who thinks B's darker. Okay, so nobody's putting their hands up. But if I show you that, you can see that actually it's just an illusion, and changing your perception and the way you look at things is really key to how you're going to address the issue of antibiotic usage in the future. Thank you very much for your attention.